Hi, I'm Irene Tansman, author of Amy and Arlene's Autism War. Today, I'd like to talk to you about the HCBS settings rule and the request from Together for Choice to write to the government to eliminate this particular set of regulations. I received an email from Together for Choice. I believe they sent this to all of their previous supporters, asking um, their supporters to go to a government website that suggests what regulations should be eliminated or revised or curtailed, and it gave you an opportunity to put in your own personal input regarding regulations. So, Together for Choice started this, and the National Council on Severe Autism joined in and supported this idea that perhaps we should think about removing the home and community-based settings rule. So when I heard about this, I was on the fence. I, I, it took me a while to, to sort of like to sort it out and think about what I actually thought about it. Because in the settings rule, there are some good things and things that I don't think really should be eliminated. Now, what is the settings rule? The settings rule is uh, a collection of regulations. It's regulations 42 CFR section 441.301C. And what that does is it defines what uh, community living actually is. We know that there's an issue with community-based programming looking just like institutional care, except being delivered at a residential address. So this group of regulations uh, actually defines what it is. It tells it actually states what community-based living should be. Okay. So there are some good things in there and some not so good things in there. It, uh, I'm not going to go through all of the things that I think are good or all of the things that I think are bad, because my judgment, I decided that I would like to see it eliminated, because the good things in the regulations are not being implemented. And it's very, very poorly defined for people who have severe autism or severe intellectual disabilities. So even though let's take, for instance, I'm just going to give you one example. Person-centered planning is actually a very nice idea. You're going to have a plan based on an evaluation geared towards the needs and preferences of the individual. It's a great idea. The only problem with it is they're not doing that. I don't see where they're doing that. They're saying they're doing that, but I don't see it. It's impossible to implement it. We have never had an audit to see whether this is actually going on. So it's the reason why I'm on board with getting rid of the settings rule is because it's an impossible rule to administer. Okay. So the settings rule was issued in 2014. It is now 2025. which is 11 years later. And we are still no closer to actually having some of those good things that are in the settings rule. Now, the settings rule supposedly took effect in 2019, but CMS realized there were problems with the implementation and delayed the implementation until 2021, and that the regulations have not really been implemented in Massachusetts in a way that prevents institutional type care from being delivered in HCBS settings. In fact, I would make the argument that in the developmental centers are doing a better job with person-centered planning than in the community-based settings. So the administrative burden of the settings rule is so burdensome that it's impossible and impractical to implement and oversee. In addition to the administrative burden and cost, the settings rule has been used to limit the type of settings that individuals with intellectual disabilities may access. In other words, the states have interpreted it so strictly that we're not able to have intentional communities. You can have intentional communities for the elderly, but we can't have it for this population. That's discrimination. So, and these limitations have affected those with the most severe disabilities disproportionately. Okay, so rather than relying on regulations and enforcement, which really doesn't work, I would like our government to rely on the principles of competition and choice. Families should be allowed to choose between an intermediate care facility, a developmental center, a variety of intentional communities, group homes, shared living, self-directed services. And when families have that choice, those offering quality services will thrive, and those delivering substantial services will suffer. Right now, there are no consequences for bad actors. The DDS decides. The Massachusetts Department of Developmental Services decides. No, it's not. There are no decisions based on poor care. So that the families see poor care and they can say, well, okay, I'll go elsewhere. That's not a possibility in Massachusetts because the DDS decides, not the individuals and the families. So how was the settings rule developed in the first place? Well, the settings rule is based on a report published by the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, ASAN, in collaboration with Advocates Becoming Empowered and the National Youth Leadership Network in 2011. They issued a joint report, a report called Joint Report Issued on Home and Community-Based Services Standards. And this was gathered, the basis of the report was get from input from self-advocates about the types of settings that they believe provided meaningful opportunities for community participation and integration. So it was never clear how the setting rules could be implemented for those with severe or profound IDD, autism, or anything like that. They did not consult with the organizations that represent this population in the creation of the rules. This was basically regulations that were created on the basis of the input of folks who had the ability to self-advocate. So this particular population was left out. Okay. So let's talk about the particulars of the home and community-based settings rule. The person-centered planning process. Now, listen, what I said is the idea of person-centered planning is great. I love it, but we don't have it. Oversight and implementation has not been achieved. There is zero evidence that individuals with IDD are receiving person-centered plans despite these regulations. There has never been an audit of plans in Massachusetts. It would be quite costly to do so. Without a person-centered plan or without choice of placement, there are no choices for individuals with IDD and their guardians. The settings rule provides the opposite of what was intended. Instead of meeting the needs and providing choice, it just limits choice. Okay, so let's talk about more. Let's talk about the discrimination. States such as Massachusetts has used the settings regulations to discriminate against individuals with IDD, especially those with the most severe forms of autism and IDD. Massachusetts has interpreted the rules so strictly that intentional communities like those for the elderly are not allowed for those with IDD, which I mentioned before. There is no interpretation in the regulation for severe IDD or severe autism. According to the regulations, the setting is integrated and supports full access of individuals receiving Medicaid, HCBS to the greater community, including opportunities to seek employment and work in competitive and integrated settings, engage in community life, control personal resources, and receive services in the community to the same degree of access as individuals not receiving HCBS. Well, this is a dream. This is a dream. That, it's very unclear what this means for people with severe IDD who cannot access the community without active treatment and instruction on how to do it. They need help in order to do those things. They need instruction to do those things. And in practice, Massachusetts has used the settings rule to justify a lack of services, including community-based instruction on alternative augmentative communication devices, speech therapy, occupational therapy, recreational therapy, vocational therapy. They cite access to the community, but for these individuals, access could mean a monthly field trip to fast food, and that's not real access to the community. Okay, so settings that are not community-based. Okay, the regulation actually lists settings that they feel are not community-based. In the settings regulations, there are specific settings that are categorized as institutional, no matter how much access to the community individuals in these facilities receive. Now, residents in the Rentham Developmental Center, one of the two remaining ICF IID facilities in Massachusetts, they enjoy substantial access to the community, but nevertheless, whatever they do, according to the settings rules, it's deemed institutional. Oh, that doesn't seem fair. Now, home and community-based compliance, CMS monitors compliance mainly by monitoring written plans and documentation. They do not get involved in individual concerns about lack of implementation or misinterpretation. Instead, those are directed back to the state attorney general. This is an admission that the settings rule cannot really be overseen by the federal government that funds it. That it's impossible and ridiculously expensive to monitor. We have thousands of people waiting for services in Massachusetts, yet we spend lots and lots of dollars on this impractical solution. So, despite the fact that I have to admit, there are some good things in the home and community-based settings rule, I am joining Together for Choice in requesting that the settings rule be eliminated in its totality. Underneath this YouTube video, I'll have links to where you can um, request that the settings rule be eliminated. I realize that a lot of people are going to disagree with me. Go ahead, tell me in the comments. I hope this video has been helpful to you, and I'll see you on the next one.